Good morning from here in the UK. If you're elsewhere in the world, good afternoon. Lovely to have you with us this morning. We'll just wait for all our attendees to join, and we've got quite a high number expected. So we'll just give it a minute to allow people to enter. Please do pop a hello in the chat if you'd like to let us know where you're from. It's always lovely to see a worldwide audience. So please do say hello. But as I say, we'll just give it a few more seconds um, to enable people to join. Morning, Justine. I'm in Wiltshire and we've got the same wet and grey. Hopefully it will cheer up a little bit later on. Morning, Chelsea. Okay, I can see it has just hit 8 o'clock, so we will get started. We've got quite a lot of information to share this morning. So as I said, welcome to today's webinar. Today we're talking about preparing for transition and seeing beyond the data to support every student. So we all know you're all incredibly busy, especially at this time of year. Although we say that every send Searchlights, there's always something going on in a school somewhere. But we really do appreciate you taking the time to join us for the conversation today. And whether you're supporting Year 6 students preparing for their secondary school journey, or you're helping pupils navigate the shift into a new key stage, transitions are those pivotal moments in a young person's educational journey. And attainment data, while it's really valuable, only tells part of that story. There are often lots of invisible barriers, things like anxiety, low self-esteem, or a lack of connection to school that can significantly impact how well a student navigates that change. So today we're going to explore how we can move beyond guesswork, how we can use data more effectively. We'll look at tools like GL Assessment's past survey and how we can proactively address emotional and motivational factors that determine whether that transition is going to become a really positive springboard or a bit of a stumbling block. So I'll hand over to Debbie, who's going to start us off.
Thank you, Polly. So let's start with the fundamentals. Why do school transitions matter so much? A transition isn't just about moving from one building to another or getting a new timetable. For many students, it represents a complete upheaval of everything that's familiar to them. The research backs this up. Studies consistently show that poorly managed transitions can lead to academic regression, increased anxiety, and even long-term disengagement from learning. One longitudinal study found that some students can take up to 2 years to fully recover academically from a difficult transition. When you think about it from a child's perspective, suddenly they're navigating larger buildings, multiple teachers, new social dynamics, and let's not forget the developmental timing. The move from secondary schools typically happens at around age 11 to 12, right at the onset of adolescence. So students are managing external change whilst also experiencing significant internal change. It's a perfect storm, really. And what we see in practice is that some students sail through transition with barely a ripple, while others struggle enormously. And it's not always the students you'd expect. High achieving students can struggle just as much as those with lower attainment, and there are strategies that schools can put in place to help make that transition from primary to secondary school much smoother. For example, many secondary schools hold open evenings in the autumn term of Year 6, giving prospective students the opportunity to explore the school environment. They involve the current students in these events, which allows them to share their experiences and provide reassurance about the school life. Prospective students should also be offered the chance to visit during a normal school day to gain a realistic understanding of how the school operates. All new Year 7 students can be invited to attend open days or summer school, potentially for up to 2 weeks, prior to starting in the September. This helps them become familiar with the school, the staff, and also their own peer groups. Regular coffee mornings can be organised, which would welcome and engage parents of the new students. And key workers can provide targeted support for students with SEND, for example, by using social stories to ease anxieties and prepare them for change. Overall, a successful transition progress is built on strong communication, trust, and developing positive relationships with both students and their parents or carers. We also mentioned invisible barriers. So let's talk about these invisible barriers. What are we actually referring to here? And I'm going to pass you back over to Polly, who's going to look into this in a bit more detail for you.
Thank you, Debbie. That's some really useful strategies already. But yes, as Debbie said, when we look at traditional transition data, we can typically see things like reading levels, maths attainment, perhaps some information about special educational needs or safeguarding concerns. I remember that when I was the Senko in a primary setting here in the UK, my role was to support those transition conversations between teachers. And the data that I've just mentioned formed a lot of those conversations. And of course, it is all crucial information. But what we often miss are some of the emotional factors that can be just as, if not more, predictive of how well a student will adapt. And actually, some of the students that we talk about in transition with the attainment data are actually performing at the expected level. So in terms of an emotional risk, they're not being flagged at that stage. So this is why tools like the PASS survey, which is a pupil attitudes to self and school, can be really helpful. And it measures 9 factors that research shows are closely linked to academic success and well-being. So some of those factors are feelings about school, their perceived learning capability, how they see themselves as a learner, how ready they are for learning, their attitudes towards teachers. So how do they perceive their relationships with the adults they're working with? What's their general work ethic like? What is their attitude to actually attending school? And how do they respond to curriculum demands? Do they perceive a curriculum too challenging? Or actually are they ready to take on more challenge? And what's powerful about PASS is that it surfaces information that students often can't or won't articulate directly. I certainly haven't had experience of a student coming up to me and just saying, I've got really low self-esteem. It's just not how it works. And I think even as adults, we can struggle to identify feelings that might be holding us back or getting in the way. But with PASS, those responses reveal those factors. So they're real measurable impacts on academic outcomes. I remember working with one particular student, and on paper, like I say, they were doing brilliantly. In the UK, we have SATs, which is a government assessment in year 2 and year 6. And in year 6, they had strong SATs results. There were no behavioural concerns, lovely reports from her teachers. And as I say, that she was the kind of student who might slip under the radar during transition planning. But when we looked at her past data, we saw a very different picture. So her self-regard as a learner was significantly below average, and her perceived learning capability was in the lowest percentile. She didn't believe in herself that she could succeed at secondary school, despite all that academic evidence to the contrary. So that disconnect between attainment and attitude is so common and so important to identify. Within that first term at secondary, students' grades had dropped and she was frequently absent. If we'd had that past insight data before the transition, then interventions could have been put in place proactively. And as Debbie said, there's lots of research behind transition, and one study suggests that up to 40% of students experience some degree of anxiety around school transitions. And I can understand that change is difficult at any point during our lives. Um, so past data from thousands of students showed us that a significant proportion have what we call those hidden vulnerabilities. They appear fine on the surface, but their attitudinal data tells a different story. Um, and it's also worth noting that certain groups are particularly vulnerable. So those students with SEND, those from disadvantaged backgrounds, looked after children, young carers, it all sort of makes sense why they would be particularly vulnerable, but they often do face those additional challenges during transition. And PASS can help us identify those students too. So, how do we move beyond that guesswork? How do we capture the information in a way that's practical and actionable? So I've mentioned PASS. I've given a very brief overview of it, but Debbie's just going to take us into a little bit more detail about PASS and how it can help your students.
Thank you, Polly. So this is where thoughtful use of data becomes so powerful. As Polly's mentioned, one of our solutions is PASS, which is Pupil Attitudes to Self and School Survey. It takes just 20 to 25 minutes to administer, so the students complete it and it generates instant actionable reports. For transition data, the ideal approach is to administer during the summer term, before students leave for the summer holidays. This gives you a baseline report and data on every student's attitude and self-perceptions as they approach transition. When you have that data, you can start to identify patterns. PASS reports highlight students who fall into different categories, those who are thriving, those who are vulnerable, and those who are at risk. It uses a traffic light system that makes it immediately clear where to focus attention, and it allows for both individual support and systemic intervention. You might find students with low self-regard as learners might benefit from mentoring programs or confidence-building interventions. Poor attitudes to attendance are worth flagging to your attendance team from day one. Low response to curriculum demands may need additional support with organisation and study skills. And low perceived learning capability may need early reassurance and quick wins to build confidence. Instead of waiting for problems to emerge, you're preparing for targeted support. PASS also enables you to identify the hidden, middle, or the fragile learners. These are students who aren't flagged as high risk on any single factor, but who show a pattern of slightly below average scores across multiple factors. Individually, each score wouldn't raise concern, but together they paint a picture of a student who may struggle. There's also value in tracking PASS data through the transition. Administering PASS again in the autumn term shows you who's adapting well and who's struggling. You can compare pre-transition and post-transition attitudes. That ongoing monitoring is crucial because sometimes the impact of the transition isn't immediate. A student might seem fine in September, but start struggling around November when the novelty has worn off and reality has set in. And with PASS, you can catch that early. If a student's attitudes have declined significantly since their previous assessment, that's an early warning sign before it becomes a crisis. PASS also provides national benchmarks, so you can see how your students compare to the national picture. This helps with resource and understanding whether challenges are specific to your context or they're more widespread. I think it's also worth mentioning the importance of student voice in all of this. PASS gives us quantitative data, but it works best when combined with genuine conversations. The data points us in the right direction, and the conversations reveal the full story. PASS should inform, not replace, human connection. When a student's PASS results raise concern, that's a prompt for pastoral conversation, not a replacement for one. Polly, what are some concrete strategies that schools could implement during their PASS data?
Good question, Debbie. So first, start early and collaborate. And I think it's important to say that the past data is really powerful, but if you don't have that, hopefully some of the suggestions that we mentioned today, you can also put into place without that additional data. So as I say, transition planning should begin earlier than you think. So not a couple of weeks into the final term, and often maybe in that spring term, but certainly around this time of year, if your school is starting to think about finishing for the summer break at the end of the July. So as Debbie mentioned, that's also when PASS can be administered, which gives you time to analyse the results and plan interventions. And it's all about information sharing. So share information, visit classrooms, enable teachers to flag concerns, and then you can use any past data alongside attainment information as well. Now, if you are using PASS or if you're thinking, oh, that sounds a really good tool, it should become part of your transition protocol, making it a standard practice, not just an add-on that you think, oh, no, we haven't done that, we've forgotten that. Use it embedded into your practice as part of transition. Now, not all students will need the same level of support. So you'll need to identify who students will be fine with a standard induction, students who might need an enhanced transition, so thinking about extra visits, summer schools, peer mentoring, and then you'll have those students who need intensive support as well. So maybe assigned safe adults, daily check-ins, and they may need more therapeutic interventions. And also make sure you're sharing insights with the right people. Transition information shouldn't just be held within pastoral teams, particularly things like past data, or if you're using any sort of wellbeing data. So thinking about form tutors, subject teachers, teaching assistants, anyone working with a potentially vulnerable student should have that heads up. Now, from a pastoral perspective, I'd also emphasize about creating that connection before content. So past data often shows us that students' feelings about schools and attitudes to teachers are really crucial predictors of success. I'm sure we can all remember our favourite teachers from when we were at school and the reasons why you felt that connection to them, the things they did or they said that made you feel really comfortable within your setting. So those first few weeks of school should really prioritise relationship building and belonging. That academic rigour can wait a few weeks. That feeling safe and connected cannot. If you don't feel that immediate warmth and connection with your school, that can be really difficult to maintain going through. Training all staff is a really good idea. So if you're using PASS, make sure every teacher knows what low self-regard looks like in the classroom and how to respond. It does come with an intervention package. So there's lots on the website about what certain factors might look like in terms of behaviour in the classroom. So a dismissive comment from a subject teacher can undo a lot of good pastoral work. And I think, again, we can apply that to our adult lives as well. When you think you've done a good job and then someone says something to the contrary, you can feel a bit disheartened and a bit discouraged. And in adults, we have a little bit more resilience. So thinking about those things that we can be saying. And also involve families. Parents and carers are often anxious too, and their anxiety transfers to children. Just today, my daughter is heading off for her induction morning at secondary school. So I'm totally in the middle of feeling like this, that feeling, is she going to be all right? How are they going to look after her? What's she going to experience? So if there are concerns, consider a pre-transition meeting with parents and explain what support will be in place. When families feel more confident, students feel more secure as well. And I think it's important to remember not to treat transition as a single event. Um, so using wellbeing surveys or pass at multiple points through from the summer term to collect baseline data, autumn term for early monitoring, and spring term to check progress. This gives you a picture of how students are changing and adapting. And then that data that you're sort of collecting for transition actually becomes part of a broader picture. So I'm going to hand back to Debbie, who's going to give us a little bit of a walkthrough of an example of how all this might look like in practice.
Thank you, Polly. So, as Polly said, let me share a quick example of how this works in practice. A primary school implemented PASS in the summer term with their year sixes. This gave them a consistent, comparable data on each student who was leaving at the end of term. The PASS report immediately highlighted students with significant vulnerabilities that hadn't been flagged through the traditional routes. They then created 3 tiers of transition support. So universal support, which was the standard transition plan for all students. Targeted support, a transition champions programme for the most vulnerable. Extra visits, peer mentoring, and assigned pastoral support. And then the intensive support. And this was for the students with the most significant concerns. A summer transition programme was organised, including only daily check-ins for the first half term when they started their new school. The outcomes from this were that students settled into secondary school successfully. The students' attendance was good, there were minimal behavioural incidents, and when the secondary school administered PASS in November, they saw improvements in attitudes right across the board, particularly among students who'd received targeted support. Staff reported feeling more confident too, and they weren't guessing which students needed support, they knew. Everything we've discussed isn't just about managing individual transitions, it's about building school and systems that are fundamentally transition ready. It means embedding these principles into school culture by having systems that routinely capture wellbeing data, having staff trained to act on that data, having communication channels with partner schools that go beyond spreadsheets of levels and grades. I'm now going to pass back to Polly, who will wrap up today's session.
Thanks, Debbie. And we've talked a lot today about transitioning from that sort of primary to secondary phase. However, it's really important to recognise that those transitions don't just happen at this point of the year. It can happen at any point. So even just entering a new year group, so transitioning from year 3 to 4, and knowing what might happen in the school year that's coming up. Moving key stage or joining a school mid-year because of other circumstances. So if students have moved house or parents have changed jobs, a number of reasons can mean that students are moving in and out of schools during the year, which can also be hard because it's not happening at the same time with everybody else. So just to summarise our key takeaways, transitions are those pivotal moments that can trigger hidden anxieties and disrupt progress. Attainment data alone isn't enough, so we need that insight into emotional and motivational factors. Ensure that your support is differentiated, so not all students will need the same transition programme. And I think shifting mindsets from thinking about transition as a process rather than as a standalone one-off event. And then just a reminder about PASS. So it provides that systematic, reliable data on pupil attitudes to self and school, revealing those invisible barriers, so taking a lot of guesswork out of it. And as we mentioned, it doesn't have to be a transition tool. It can be embedded into schools as part of your wellbeing monitoring. Now, if you'd like to learn more about PAST or you're interested in it, there is going to be a poll that's going to pop up on screen now. So if you'd like to fill that in, if you would like more information. But just remember, during transition, behind every data point is a young person navigating one of the most significant changes of their life so far. I certainly know from my daughter, it's a huge event coming up, and I've sort of forgotten how that felt when I was at that stage. And PASS can help us see more clearly that it's our job to act on insights, ensuring that change becomes an opportunity for growth, not a barrier to success. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you found this session valuable. Send Searchlights now does take a break for the summer. We can't believe we're at this point already. A lot of schools are very busy in July and obviously on break in August, so we do end in June. But please do join us again in September when we tackle more pressing Send topics. Thank you so much. Take care and best of luck with your transition planning and have a lovely break when it arrives. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you very much, and look forward to seeing you again in September.